are having an amazing day so far. All right, so for today, we will be doing our grade 7 English lesson on restrictive and non-restrictive elements. So we're going to be doing our grade 7 English lesson on restrictive and non-restrictive elements. And before we start, we are going to log in to aplusstudents.ca, and we're going to log in with our username as well as our password. We're going to select language arts and then grade 7. All right, and our chapter that we are focusing on today is restrictive and non-restrictive elements. So we're going to click on the chapter restrictive and non-restrictive elements. So under the chapter of restrictive and non-restrictive elements, our lessons that we are focusing on today is what does the punctuation suggest, and commas with non-restrictive elements. So what does the punctuation suggest, and commas with non-restrictive elements. All right. So we said our focus chapter is restrictive and non-restrictive elements. And the lessons we are focusing on is, or that we are doing today, is what does the punctuation suggest, and commas with non-restrictive elements. And all of our lessons, or let's say today's lesson, we will be doing on, it will be on A plus students.ca, right? Our lessons will be on A plus students.ca, and we are doing the tutorials on there as well as the tests that we are going to be doing on A plus students.ca. So if you do decide to go back, then you will be able to go or log into apens.ca. All right, so when it comes to restrictive and non-restrictive elements, restrictive elements, right, is limits the meaning of the word it alters, right? It is essential for understanding the sentence, therefore is not set off by any commas. So restrictive elements, right, which is also known for essential elements, of phrases or clauses that are necessary to make the meaning of the sentence clear. But when it comes to restrictive elements, right, we need to know who or what is being discussed. And that is why it says that we need to make the meaning clear within the sentence so that we can identify who is being discussed and what is being discussed within the sentence. And when it comes to restrictive elements, then these elements are not set off by any commas, meaning that we don't need to put any commas in order to make it more clear, right? So usually with commas, it gives you clear ideas as this is what we are talking about, right? Or it separates certain clauses and phrases, or it's more like added clauses or phrases. Restrictive words or phrases, they modify the noun or the pronoun. That is why we're saying it is it is essential for us to know who or what is being discussed, right? And that is why they're saying that it is words or phrases that modify the noun or the pronoun. But it is not set off by any commas. When it comes to restrictive elements, the reader must have this information to understand the sentence, meaning that information needs to be given, or you need to know certain information in order to understand the sentence when it comes to a restrictive element. And an example of a restrictive element is food which is not high in calories often tastes very good. So food which is not high in calories often tastes very good. Food which is high in calories often tastes good, tastes very good. And if we were to explain what that sentence means, it says that this sentence, right, is not correct because you were to write food which is high in calories often tastes very good, right? This would be implying that all foods often taste good. So if we were to say that food, comma, which is high in calories often tastes very good. And that implies that all foods, they often taste very good. And remember, we said that when it comes to restrictive elements, it is not set off by any commas. Then we have non-restrictive elements, right? And non-restrictive elements are phrases or clauses that are not necessary, like it's not trying to make a sentence clear, right? So non-restrictive elements are phrases or clauses that are not necessary to make a sentence clear. So any added information, right? When it comes to non-restrictive elements, it is just an added information. And non-restrictive elements are set off by commas. Whether it is part of the sentence or additional information, whether it tells us who or what is being discussed, right? With non-restrictive elements, we will be able to identify who or what is being discussed without or with the information. So even if we remove that added information, we will still be able to identify who or what is being discussed. Whereas with restrictive elements, we need added information in order to make it clear and to identify who or what is being discussed. But it is not restricted or set off by any commas. Non-restrictive elements are pieces of additional information that help clarify a noun or pronoun. So we give added information. Whether we remove that information, it will still tell us who or what is being discussed, right? So with a non-restrictive element, it is pieces of additional information. It helps us to clarify the noun or the pronoun. However, even without it, we will still know who or what is being discussed. So taking out a non-restrictive element will not change the meaning or understand the sentence. And that is where the added information comes in. Whether we remove that added information, it does not mean that we will not understand the meaning of the sentence, or it will not change the meaning or the understanding of the sentence. We will still know we will know who is being discussed, and we will still know what is being discussed. We will still be able to identify that. And non-restrictive elements, right, is an element that describes or adds information to the noun or to the pronoun whose meaning is already defined. And that is why we're saying it is added information, right? With or without the added information, we will still know who or what is being discussed. And that is why they say it adds additional information to the noun or pronoun whose meaning is already defined. We have already identified who or what. The meaning is already there. And it contains information that is not essential to the main point of the sentence. And that is specifically the added information. Therefore, a non-restrictive element is set off by a comma. Example: ice cream is not included in my diet, is a food I try to avoid. So ice cream, which is not included in my diet, is a food I try to avoid. So even if we reread the sentence, right, it says ice cream, comma, which is not included in my diet, comma, is food I try to avoid. So even if we were to remove which the added information which says which is not included in my diet, we will still know, right? Still be able to, the meaning will still be clear, which tells us that ice cream is food that this person is trying to avoid. So this is just added information which is not included in my diet. Because if you're avoiding the food, then of course you're not going to put it in your diet. You see, so this is an added information, right? And with or without this information, it is still clear. The meaning of the sentence or the understanding of the sentence is still clear that ice cream is food I try to avoid. Or ice cream, which is not included in my diet, is food I try to avoid. So with or without that additional sentence, right? It will not change the meaning or understanding of the sentence. All right, so now we are going back to our tutorial lesson on apestudents.ca, right? And the chapter is restrictive and non-restrictive elements. The first lesson that we are going to discuss is what does the punctuation suggest? All right, so we have a few examples over here, right? Where we need to basically say, what does the following sentences suggest? Remember we said with restrictive elements, it is not set off by any commas, right? And we need to be able to identify who or what is being discussed. It is very important. And then we have non-restrictive elements, which is set off by examples. It's always set off by examples. And it has information that is added. So it has added information. So even with or without that added information, the meanings of the sentence or the understanding of the sentence is still clear. So we are now going to say what the following sentence suggests. So what does the following sentence suggest? All right. Put the cherries that are bruised or soft in this container. Bonnie instructed her assistant in the kitchen. We can use them to make jam. So put the cherries that are bruised or soft in this container. Bonnie instructed her assistants in the kitchen. We can use them to make jam. So the question is, what does the following sentence suggest? And in this sentence, it suggests that some of the cherries are bruised or soft, right? And those cherries that is bruised or soft needs to be put in the container because they are going to be making jam with it, right? But they're specifically suggesting that the cherries that are bruised or soft needs to be put aside. It needs to be put in the container. So what does it suggest again? That only some of the cherries are bruised or soft. It does not say that all of the cherries are bruised or soft. That is why they're saying put the cherries that are bruised or soft in the container, meaning that there are fresh ones and then there are ones that are bruised or soft. And the ones, and only the ones that are bruised or soft needs to be put in the container. All right, if we look at the next sentence, what does the following sentence suggest? The guest lecturer, Mandy Yamada, will address the following question. Would high-speed rail solve America's transportation problem? So would high-speed or would high-speed rail solve America's transportation? So what does the following suggestion mean? Right? So this suggests that if we look at remember we want to also identify who or what is being discussed. And in this case, right, Miss Mary Yamada is the guest lecturer that is addressing the question or that is addressing, let's say, either university students. We are just making an example, right? Let's assume that she is addressing university students. And in this case, if we must say that what is being suggested, right, that there's only one guest lecturer, which is Mary Yamada. So Mary Yamada is set off by commas, right, which gives us the information that there's only one guest lecturer, and that guest lecturer is Mary Yamada. So which means that this is non-restrictive. Right? And why is it non-restrictive? Because it is set off by commas. So whether it could be removed, this is now a comma, whether it could be removed from the sentence, and the identity of the guest lecturer would still be clear. So even if we take away Mary Yamada, we will still know who the guest lecturer is because there's only one guest lecturer. So we don't even have to mention a name. We can just say the guest lecturer. So whether we add a name or we remove a name, the sentence and identity of the guest lecturer would still be clear. And that is non-restrictive elements. So this sentence suggests that there's only one guest lecturer, and that is Mary Yamada. And like we said, whether you remove the name Mary Yamada or we leave the name over there, the sentence is still clear. The identity of the guest lecturer would still be clear. All right, so what does the following sentence suggest? Next month, the Cedarburg Parks Department will remove elm trees that have been diagnosed with Dutch elm disease in an effort to prevent the fungus from spreading to other trees. So what does the sentence suggest? In this case, it suggests that only some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease. And what gives us the indication that only some have it? That is where they're saying that the department will remove the elm trees that have been diagnosed. They're not saying that they're going to remove all the elm trees. They're saying that they are going to remove the elm trees that have been diagnosed with elm disease. And they're going to remove it before the fungus spreads to other trees. Which means that if we even look at the sentence, right, this is not even set off by any commas, which means that this is a restrictive element, right? So which means that only the trees that have been diagnosed with the Dutch elm disease will be removed. And that have been diagnosed with Dutch elm disease is not set off by any commas. And we call that being restrictive. It narrows down the identity of the elm tree. So the sentence suggests that only some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease, not all of the trees. And that is why they said they're going to remove the elm trees that have been diagnosed with Dutch elm disease before it spreads to the other trees. And that gives us the indication that it is not all of the elm trees. So only some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease. All right, so now we're going to begin our test. If we look at our sentence, right, the concert attendees who ordered tickets in advance may enter the arena as early as 4 p.m. We need to say what the sentence or what the punctuation suggests. Does it suggest that all concert attendees ordered tickets in advance? Or does it suggest that only some concert attendees did not order tickets in advance? So the concert attendees who ordered tickets in advance may enter the arena as early as 4 p.m. So this is a restrictive element, right? That is not set off by any commas. That is why they say who ordered tickets in advance. Now we need to say what it suggests. In this case, all concert attendees who ordered tickets in advance may enter the arena as early as 4 p.m., which gives us indication that not all of the concert attendees ordered tickets in advance. And that is why they say if you order tickets in advance, then you may enter the arena as early as 4 p.m. The others are probably going to buy at the gate or something, right? But they did not buy the tickets in advance. So which means that what does the following suggest? We will say that some concert attendees did not order tickets in advance. All right, so here we also need to say what the following sentence suggests. The exhibit that displays about 1,500 dinosaur bones in a popular extraction at the Curry Exhibit Hall in Dinosaur National Monument. So the exhibit that displays about 1,500 dinosaur bones is a popular attraction at the Quarry Exhibit Hall in Dinosaur National Monument. We need to suggest or we need to basically say what the following sentence suggests. Does it mean that option 1, there is more than one exhibit at the query exhibit hall? Or the display of dinosaur bones is the only exhibit at the query exhibit hall? So there is more than one exhibit at the query exhibit hall, or the display of dinosaur bones is the only exhibit at the query exhibit hall. So the exhibit that displays about 1,500 dinosaur bones is a popular extraction at the query exhibit hall in Dinosaur National Monument. All right, so we now need to say what it suggests, right? Does it mean that there is more than one exhibit at the query exhibit hall, or the display of dinosaur bones is the only exhibit at the query exhibit hall? And this is a restrictive element. All right, let us choose the first one, right? That suggests that there is more than one exhibit at the query exhibit hall. It's just that the bones is the most attraction at the exhibit. Mr. Mason continued his annual tradition of inviting friends over for 4th of July hootenanny at his vacation home, which is on the Russian River near Forestville. So Mr. Mason continued his annual tradition of inviting friends over for a 4th of July hootenanny at his vacation home, which is on the Russian River near Forestville. So we need to now say what the following suggests, right? Does it suggest that Mr. Mason has only one vacation home? Or does it suggest that Mr. Mason has more than one vacation home? And in this case, this is also a restrictive element, which tells us that Mr. Mason has only one vacation home, right? And that is why they're saying it is a annual thing, right? Of inviting friends over for a 4th of July hootenanny at his vacation home, meaning that every year he is at the same vacation home, and it gives us the indication that he only has one vacation home. All right. And then what does the following sentence suggest? Next month, the Cedarburg Parks Department will remove elm trees that have been diagnosed with Dutch elm disease in an effort to prevent the fungus from spreading to other trees. And this is also a restrictive element. We need to say what the sentence suggests. Does it suggest that some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease, or all of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease? So some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease, or all of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease. And remember here they're saying that we'll remove elm trees that have been diagnosed in order to prevent spreading to other trees, which means that only some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease, not all of them. All right, and then that are bruised or soft in this container, Bonnie instructed her assistant in the kitchen. We can use them to make jam. So put the cherries that are bruised or soft in this container Bonnie instructed her assistants in the kitchen, we can use them to make jam. So we need to say what the following suggests. Does it suggest that all of the cherries are bruised or soft? Or only some of the cherries are bruised or soft? And in this case, it's telling us that only some of the cherries are bruised and soft. And that is why they're saying put the cherries that are bruised in the container. It doesn't saying that put all of the cherries that are bruised. They're saying the ones that are bruised or soft in the container, because that is going to be used for jam. So only some of the cherries are bruised or soft. All right. So that is it for our first lesson on what does the punctuation suggest. And now we're going over to commas with non-restrictive elements. All right, and if we look at commas with non-elements, right? They're saying that if the relative clause in bold is non-restrictive for the comma, right? So if it is non-restrictive, then we need to set it off with a comma. But if it is restrictive, then we submit the text without making any changes. All right, so number one says, rather than using a traditional rock and roll band for entertainment, the state fair organizers decided to hire the hip hop group that had performed at local arts festival earlier this year. All right, if we look at that once again, it says that the relative clause that had performed at the local arts festival earlier that year is restrictive. So the word in bold or the words in bold is restrictive, right? The information is needed to narrow down the hip hop group that is being discussed. So if we just had to say, rather than use a traditional rock and roll band for entertainment, the state fair organizers decided to hire a hip hop group. So if we had just said that, then it wouldn't have been cleared. But by adding the information that had performed at the local arts festival earlier this year, gives us a clear indication of who the hip hop group was because they had already performed at the local arts festival earlier that year, which means that this is restrictive information, right? And we needed that information in order to tell us who or what is being discussed. All right. If the relative clause is bold or non-restrictive, set it off with commas, and if it is restrictive, subtext without making any changes. Ruth, who's trying to learn more about local food sources, recently joined a mushroom expert to go foraging for wild mushrooms. So Ruth, who's trying to learn more about local food sources, recently joined a mushroom expert to go foraging for wild mushrooms. Remember, we now need to say if this is restrictive or non-restrictive. And in this case, right, I would suggest is non-restrictive. And they said that we need to add the commas where necessary, right? Means that we are going to add a comma. Ruth, comma, who's trying to learn more about local food sources, comma, recently joined a mushroom expert to go foraging for wild mushrooms, which gives us indication that this is non-restrictive. It is set off by commas, right? And even if we were to remove who's trying to learn more about local food sources, we will still basically know who or what is being discussed, meaning that the sentence or the identity of Ruth would still be clear. So this is a non-restrictive element. If the a, a positive in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with a comma. And if it is restrictive, then we must just submit the text without making any changes. Legendary musician Ray Charles learned to read Braille music at the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind. Ray Charles. So, legendary musician Ray Charles learned to read Braille music at the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind. And if we look at that specific sentence, right, the appositive Ray Charles is restrictive. So, this sentence is a restrictive sentence or element, right? The information, which is like Ray Charles, is needed in order for us to narrow down the legendary musician that is being discussed. We needed to narrow down who is being discussed, and that is the legendary musician, which is Ray Charles. And that is why we said it's not set off by any commas. So basically, if we were to say, if the opposition in bold is non-restrictive or restrictive, we say it is restrictive. And the information that it gives us is that legendary musician Ray Charles learned to read Braille music at Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind. All right, let us go to our test. We are now by the test, right? They say that if the relative clause in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with commas and is restrictive, submit the text without making any changes. At its height, the Inca Empire, which controlled some 10 million people, was the largest empire in the world. So, at its height, the Inca Empire, which controlled some 10 million people, was the largest empire in the world. So, now we need to choose the correct answer. Is it at its height, the Inca Empire, which controlled some 10 million people, was the largest empire in the world? Or at its height, the Inca Empire, which controlled some 10 million people, was the largest empire in the world? In this case, whether we remove the words in bold, the added information, the sentence will still make sense. We will still know who or what is being discussed. So this is non-restrictive. So we are going to choose option 2. All right. If a positive in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with commas. And if it is restrictive, submit the text without making changes. Diamonds, precious gems renowned for their dazzling sparkle, are formed when carbon atoms undergo extreme pressure at high temperatures. usually around 100 miles below the surface of the Earth. So diamonds, which are precious gems renowned for their dazzling sparkle, are formed when the carbon atoms undergo extreme pressure at high temperatures, usually around 100 miles below the surface of the Earth. So now, firstly, we need to say if this is a restrictive or a non-restrictive element. And if we specifically look at the word in bold, which is precious gem, renowned for the dazzling soul, right? That is basically describing the diamond, which means that this is going to be a non-restrictive element, right? We're going to put a comma of the diamond and a comma of the sparkle. And we're going to choose option 1. Because even without that added information, the sentence or the understanding and meaning of the sentence would still be clear. So we are choosing option 1. All right. If the appositive in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with a comma. But if it is restrictive, submit the text without making any changes. California's Sequoia National Park is home to General Sherman, the world's largest giant sequoia. So, California's Sequoia National Park is home to General Sherman, the world's largest giant sequoia. So, now we need to choose the correct answer based on the two options. Is it California Sequoia National Park is home to General Sherman, the world's largest giant sequoia, or California Sequoia National Park is home to General Sherman, the world's largest giant sequoia? And in this case, right, we are going to choose option 1. Right? Because even without that, like we're going to put a comma there, and even without the world's largest giant sequoia, the sentence would still make sense. Ed, who is at repairing broken electronics, refused to disassemble and inspect his sister's glitchy laptop. Instead, he advised her to buy a new one. So Ed, who is adept at repairing broken electronics. So we need to either choose option 1 or option 2. Is it a restrictive or a non-restrictive element? All right, so we're going to choose option 2, right? Because even if we were to remove the words in bold, which is who is adept at repairing broken electronics, the sentence or the meaning of the sentence would still be the same. And Oscar Hammerstein, the second only person named Oscar to have won an Academy Award. So now we need to choose one of our best options. Is it the first one, the lyricist Oscar Hammerstein? The second is the only person named Oscar to have won an academic award, not academic, Academy Award, or the lyricist Oscar Hammerstein. The second is the only person named Oscar to have won an academic award. All right, so we're going to choose the first one, right? Which is a restrictive element. All right. So that is now the end of our lesson on restrictive elements. And we said with these elements, right, it is not set off by any commas, and the sentence needs to be cleared in order for us to make meaning of it, right? Whereas with non-restrictive elements, it is always set off by commas, and even if we remove whatever that is within the commas, right, let's say after the commas, right, that is basically just added information. That is added information, which if we remove, then it means that the identity of who or what is being discussed will still stay the same. The meaning won't change, or the understanding of that sentence. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on restrictive and non-restrictive element. Thank you very much for joining our class. You should have a good day further. Goodbye.